Okay, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. It's the Liquor Control Committee. We're having just kind of an open meeting today. And Steve, if you want to kind of kick it off, and then we'll pass it on to Nancy, and away we go.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner, and invite everybody to just, kind of speak what's on your mind and let us know. So we had a session like this a couple of years ago and we have a couple of new committee members now since that. And so we just wanted to kind of go over some of the items that we had before that we were working on, and then some of the items that are left that we've been thinking about, that, trying to find a path forward. Are these still things that we want to work on? Some of that. So I think I'll just have Nancy kind of go through the review of what we have accomplished.
Okay, so some time ago, I've got a copy of the memorandum to LCB that we presented. Chief Sobolski had a PowerPoint at that time with some recommendations for changes to Fargo Municipal Code Chapter 2515. I'll just kind of summarize what those were and successes we've had and changes. One of the items was the management background investigation, and that was something that was presented to Liquor Control Board and advanced to City Commission for owners and background checks to be done on a yearly basis. And with that, an accompanying resolution so that we were kind of capturing just the more recent hires, and also the ability to spread out the license applications that were coming in. So it was on the list, and there's been some action taken on that regard. The 100% server training, the prior ordinance was that they had to be server trained within 90 days, and it was something that was being put on by the auditor's office. That has also been accomplished 100% at the time of hire, which is an online program, and compliance checks and reminders have been provided to the licensees on that requirement. And that will be a more stringent enforcement. We've talked about the de-escalation training, and there has been de-escalation training given pursuant to a course of the North Dakota Safety Council. So that is something that I think there was at least one class that wasn't quite the right fit, and then there was another class that was a better fit. So Steve, as I understand, is going to continue to work with the North Dakota Safety Council to make sure those classes are available for de-escalation training. The other items that we've talked about are a penalty overhaul, and to my right here is Will Wisher, Assistant City Attorney, and he is going to kind of address that in a little bit more length here shortly. And then the other thing that we've talked about are technology uses, and that was with respect to video and metal detectors, wand scanners, and then also ID scanners. So we've had some work that has been accomplished. I can also add that the over-serving ordinance was addressed, that it wasn't simply just that the officer had to see the alcohol served, but being able to establish that over-serving by other evidence and indicators. That is presently the findings that have been made by the city commissioner are pending before the district court. So that is where we're at. Licenses will be renewed, staggered, and we're already getting some of those backgrounds and investigations coming forward. There may be a little more further discussion about some of the findings that have been made as a result of those background investigations, but that will come to you at a regular meeting. Right now, what's pending, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit before we get into a couple of other potential recommendations that we'll present to you, is that this board approved going to City Commission with a recommendation that a penalty be able to be waived if for a violation of the compliance check, which is presently a first offense is a $500. And so one of the things that it was directed by the Liquor Control Board to present to City Commission for that there's, instead of having a $500, you could instead use a scanner for that violation. And as I was working on the city, working on that direction back from the city commission, I was struggling a bit as to what are we accomplishing here? How are we doing this? And I really wanted to just kind of bring it to, for discussion purposes, what the recommendation was to allow a person who, or a licensee who failed a compliance check, which is usually the officer goes in and there's just a failure to request the ID or a failure to read it properly. Most of the time it's a failure to request the ID at all. The recommendation from Liquor Control Board and presented to City Commission was to allow that individual entity to use a scanner to, so it kind of go back to what we used to have, which was the city, it was a maybe waived, and it would be a maybe waived, that $500 if they used a scanner. And I said, well, what if they're already using a scanner and they didn't, they just simply failed to ask for ID? Because if they're with a police officer, if they ask for the ID will be a real ID that's presented. So the scanner is intended to detect false IDs and also to correctly read the age. So I wanted to bring that back. Previously, it was a first violation that may be waived, but that was removed. And, you know, I think there's some discussion about what is the purpose of the penalty is to ensure that IDs are being asked for and complied with. So I wanted to see how we wanted to proceed with that for an ordinance change, and if there is some other options to bring that for compliance purposes. The other considerations, so I'm looking for a little bit more direction, frankly, on that one. I don't know how to draft that one. Other considerations are the video. And we had discussions about the quality of the video, how long it must be retained. Are they required to have it? Is somebody going to be helping them in terms of the cost of securing that? And then also the scanners, which licensees must have a scanner, what is the quality of the scanner, and how are they being made available? So those are two other things that we need to discuss a little bit more. I think then, Steve, if your understanding is right, we want to go to, I don't know if you want to just discuss the options to reduce the penalty before we go into anything regarding the penalty structure and such?
Yeah, since there's already been a motion to consider that, having an option of being able to waive that penalty, you know, provided, I think what John had said, Nancy and I met with John, you know, at a different date and time and to try to get some clarity on that. And what John really was thinking was, let's reintroduce that waiver if they do something, so that they have to do something, you know, which, but then as Nancy brought up, you know, that really you know, I guess if you're saying that they have to use a scanner, well, what if they already have a scanner, or, you know, what are you really trying to do? You know, the penalty is for failure to ask for that ID, because they're not using a fake ID when they do those compliance checks. And so I don't know, that was really I think where Nancy was kind of getting stuck on how do I write this ordinance? You know, if you want to go just back to that, you know, the open-ended, they may ask for a waiver. Well, part of the problem then was that you know, if somebody showed up, basically they were getting that waiver. And then we ran into the situations where with like Full Delicious, where, you know, you felt compassion for the guy, but the ordinance was written pretty cut and dry. So I'm not sure how the board wants to move ahead with some of those ideas.
Can I just say, so one of the things would be you would have the option of keeping you would still have the penalty, but you would also have the option of using the scanner. So to me, that would eliminate the concern about, well, what if they already have a scanner and they still get a violation? Well, then they get the fine. I don't know if you follow, or if that makes sense, but do you get what I'm saying? To me, I think what John was looking for was for us to have this option to say, if you're, and then the other thing is, I do think we have to be specific about, so if they decide, okay, instead of the fine, I want to do this, well, what's the time? How long do they have to have the scanner? Is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? I guess that's the, go ahead, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to kind of weigh in on this also, I think I understand what John was trying to get to, but I think the use of a scanner in a compliance check situation is not really applicable. And I'd be happy to go back through these in bulk and provide this data to the board, but most of the compliance checks we see, in many instances, the person looks right at the ID and still serves the person. I think the compliance checks have showed themselves to be a valuable tool, especially when we go back to places, and these are very, very infrequent in a year's time, and we find that they have violated again. And anecdotally, I don't think it's a hard law to follow. You're serving alcohol, you're required to make sure the person you're serving is old enough. So I think the applicability of the scanner, as proposed by John, would be very appropriate in situations where we have underage persons in the tavern, in the liquor establishment, because that is a true connection to some issue at the door where these people are getting in versus a compliance check situation. I would just suggest that if the board considers that, maybe steer in that direction, I think it would have more applicability. And because the other way, I think we're minimizing and watering down the effect of these compliance checks. I mean, it's very simple. You're supposed to ask for the ID. These aren't tricky. And I think that should stay the way that it is, just from the PD perspective.
So can I just add, and Chief, if you don't, please correct me, but so to me, checking IDs, to manually, that's what we expect everyone to do. To me, the scanners, that's complementary. That is not your only line. Does that make sense if I describe it? So to give you an example, there's a bar I go to, they have somebody that checks IDs at the front and back. Everybody that comes in manually checks IDs. They also have a scanner, but that's complementary if they have something. Go ahead.
No, I agree. It's additional safeguard, and I think its greater applicability is making sure that we don't have underage people in the establishment itself. I think once they're in there, that part should be done. But on the compliance check part, that really is a different piece, and I don't see that the scanner helps that, other than if they fail the compliance check, giving them a scanner isn't going to be any better than when they look at the ID, they see they're underage, and they serve them. You know what I'm saying? And so I just feel like I get the idea, but I don't think it's helpful other than watering down the compliance checks in general. If everyone just gets to go, well, give me a scanner. And the other part of this is how many scanners do we have, and how, not only, like you said, how long, but what's the benefit of that versus a situation where maybe a licensed establishment is having issues with underage people getting in.
Anybody else that wants to jump in? But it was just, I mean, for all of us to see the quality of the fake IDs now, where literally for us it was hard to tell. And obviously, if you're in the business every day, you can tell, but it was so difficult. That's the challenge. And so I think for us, we had a little bit of sympathy for the business owners, because it's just so literally, we would get in trouble. Anyway.
And sure, and just one other thing, if I could just remember, on compliance checks, they're not getting a fake ID. They're getting a real ID, and they're still deciding to serve, or they're not asking for the ID.
Very good. Any other comments? Nancy, you look like you have something to add.
Again, not sure what I'm modifying here. It almost sounds like potentially an amended motion. It's not adding a scanner to the compliance check failure, but adding the requirement of a scanner for an underage service violation. That would be a different section, and perhaps more related to they were either underage because they accepted a false ID, or they allowed somebody in underage because they didn't check the ID at all. And that's not necessarily a compliance failure as it is a underage service failure.
And I don't want to speak for John, but I think what he was looking for was just to have this be a flexibility, that we could still have the fines in place, but this would be another option for us to have. I think that's what we were looking for, because we want to encourage them to be used. I don't know, so I don't want to speak for everybody, but go ahead if you have something.
I think John was at the time he brought that up, he is in favor of the ability for us to recommend a waiver because of the circumstances. You know, I mean, one of them was a little tiny restaurant, and the guy who owns it always served the alcohol, and for some reason he had an emergency, was at the back door, and somebody else messed up. So I think we waived that one. But then he came back another few months later with the same problem again, so maybe we messed up. I don't know, Nancy, do you have opinion on, I mean, are waivers okay? Are they, does that deter the ordinance? You know, should it have that leeway with a board? I mean, we're not judges, but I do think there are going to be instances where there's circumstances that you have to say, you know, do we really want to give this guy a $500 fine?
My response to that is it's a policy question, probably not a legal question. From a legal standpoint, we would want to ensure that any waiver opportunity was applied objectively without, so you'd want it, the word I use is squishy. You don't want it squishy. You need to be able to apply it uniformly across the board if you're going to consider a waiver. And I think that was part of the concern previously on maybe waived, but what were the considerations that are taken into account as to when it may be waived? And again, that's a policy question as well.
Anything, Tatiana?
Yeah, to me, it sounds like maybe the motion does need to be amended a bit. But what I'm thinking here in this discussion is that if we could go through the penalty structure, or if you could, Nancy, and pick up the ordinances where this may be applicable to and actually apply to, and have it apply to those violations. You know, if there's 10 ordinances and it only applies to 5 of them, something like that, but being clear to where it actually is applicable to, almost within like that table of violations, and making sure it's clear there. I don't know if that makes sense, but it may just be going through them and see where does it make sense to put this.
Any other comments? Do you feel like you're getting some good direction, Nancy, or are we still being too vague for you, like politicians usually are?
I think it warrants further discussion, and I don't think I can move forward the ordinance as it went through city commission. But I think as we come back and now you've had an opportunity to consider it, I do think that there is an opportunity to have further discussion, like you say, in the penalty matrix. I'm looking at, we always say, you know, find a violation in accordance with the penalty matrix. So this is just taken out of the ordinance for ease of reading it. But of course, when you're, if it's not a compliance check, but you are allowing a person under 21 to enter or otherwise serving them, is that when you want to use that scanner in a violation, or it may be waived and or here's the penalty and you're required to use a scanner? That's what I wasn't sure if that was also the consideration. So I think this is a good discussion. I don't know that I have the direction that I need yet, but I think when we talk about the penalty structure and also then kind of talk about, you know, scanner availability and type and also video type, that might help inform the decisions.
Go ahead, Steve.
Mr. Chair, thanks. So what I would suggest then is, as we leave today, or you know, when you go about your day, if you think of situations, so like Nancy said, waiver if something happens, right? So, you know, what are the circumstances where you would consider a waiver, I guess, of that compliance check? That's the thing. And then if we can put those to paper, then it'll help to direct Nancy in the right path. Or as we think about it more, you know, a little more deeply, maybe there aren't cases where we should be waiving that penalty. You know, it's a simple thing. What we want is for everybody to be asking for that ID, you know, and if they ask for that ID, they're not going to fail the compliance check. So, and when you know, it's important to keep the compliance check aspect separate from the minors aspect of it, so.
So Steve, if you don't mind me asking, so how many of those, the scanners do we have?
Yeah, after our last discussion, I did check with Rob, and I think she said she has 15 available and like 5 deployed. So at this point, you know, if we want to have something in there for, you know, if you use a scanner type of situation, we have ample. And I think she said that she would be getting more available in the near future, so.
Okay, so if that's okay with everyone, we kind of have a working direction, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, if that's okay with you. And that's amend ordinances to mandate videos be available to police, video storage minimum 30 days. And Steve, I don't know if you want to start with that, or Nancy?
Yeah, well, and I will, I don't know if I've got exactly what we're talking about, Chief and Nancy down here, but I think those are some of the things that we were talking about. Now, I did get email communication from somebody that's in the industry that wasn't so sure that we could mandate this, and that's a legal question. That's not for me to interpret that. But, you know, in the past, what we've had to do, if we don't get immediate cooperation with the businesses, that we have to go and get a search warrant. And then, you know, and I think, Chief, you're going to have to guide me on this, but does the search warrant have to be in connection with a crime, not just the over-serving, something like that?
Yes, generally. So I'll let Nancy talk about the ordinance implications, and then I can come back to that.
So yes, and I would say that is correct. We would be looking at license violations only. And again, with the understanding that the license is a privilege, it's an opportunity from the city to operate a liquor license. I understand there's an interest in, you know, there's a lot of reasons to tread lightly in taking those licenses away or sanctioning them. But again, it's a question of should that video be available for purposes of a license violation, not a criminal violation. And at that point, you know, if it's returned over for a license violation, it would only be used for that purpose. And that would, I understand that the implications there is, the question is, can that facility be required to have a video turned over to police and only be used for the license violation? And that is what I think has been a discussion point.
Can I just comment real quick? I think you have to be real careful here because this gets into the First Amendment. And also, I mean, if you have videos in your premises, if it's used to do something that's going to damage you, it might encourage them to not have video. That's what concerns me. It's like if it's going to incriminate you, which is a potential thing, I think you have to be very careful. That's just, and Tatiana's our legal expert, but I just think we want to encourage people to have video, but if you're going to use it to potentially damage yourself, I would pull all my cameras. That's just me.
Yeah.
Any other, and Tatiana, you're the expert, so I guess I'm confused.
Nancy's the expert. I'm wary about it. Do we know if any cities have similar ordinances or requirements?
And I'm going to look to the chief on that one, but it's a question of require video or if have video. So that's kind of the first question. And then the second question is what's the quality of the video? How long do they retain the video? And when is it made available? So I do think there are some discussion points on that. I haven't gotten direction as to move forward on anything, but that was a discussion back in 2022.
I would agree with Dave. I think this is just an absolute terrible can of worms. I mean, we compare bars on their violations, et cetera. Some people have fantastic systems, some people don't. Some people point them more at the tills and the crowd. I think it's a step too far in controlling their business. I've talked to a handful of bar owners that are also worried that in an over-serving controversy, which is to me is really overconsumption first, over-serving has to show some negligence. If there's now video available, does that put the bar civilly liable to that consumer who should, you know, who's the one who decided to overdrink too? The last thing I'll say is, and Chief, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I think the spirit of the industry in this town has been very cooperative when somebody wants a video. Sounds like you've had some instances where they don't, but I think, I would guess it's 90% or higher, that if you ask for something, they're going to give it to you. And I think that as an industry, rather than more regulations, if we continue to get cooperation from the trade, I think that's a more comfortable feeling thing and is a better relationship between the city and the trade.
Sure, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so good question and a good point. I think we do have probably 90% is a pretty accurate. The ones that don't are in the positions where there's a situation and an issue that we probably would want to take cognizance of, but I understand it's difficult. I'd be happy to research other cities that have something similar and bring that back for your consideration. Yeah, so I think that's it on a video question for now. We'll do some more research and bring that back.
No, I agree with Bob and you. I think that the businesses that are using cameras, I would hate for them to, because usually when you're putting cameras in there, it's a lot of it's for internal. You're looking for internal theft. You're looking for people that are, you know, either trying to take advantage of your business to try to have a business hinder from that to actually make their business more difficult for these circumstances. And then you look at all the logistics. If you make it required, how many cameras you need, what system do you need? There's so many. I mean, you could have, coming from big box retail, we had 80, 90 cameras, state-of-the-art equipment. There's still loopholes. There's still ways where employees find out where that camera is and just twist it. Or if you have a teenager that you know that you have a home camera and somehow it gets unplugged. I mean, things happen, that type of stuff. So I would hate to see that there's any requirements or anything else like that. But I agree with Bob. I think that it's great that those that are working together and we try to increase that involvement. But I just think, what would the logistics be? And there's so many different loopholes for that. I think it would be a bad road to go down.
Anything else anybody wants to add?
One last thing,
Bob.
just out of curiosity, at the beginning of the conversation, it was said that video can't be subpoenaed unless it's a crime versus an infraction. Was that kind of Nancy's question, or?
Well, she's talking about a search warrant, so it's Fourth Amendment search warrant. So if we're acquiring evidence for a crime, you consent or some other Fourth Amendment exception or search warrant to acquire that. So we get a lot of our video in these situations consensually from the owners. And where we don't get it, I would assume it's probably not going to be favorable. But as we do the research, that might be something else for the board to consider. You know, we provide the example with the information that we have. We might have body-worn camera. We'll let you know that we asked the owner to provide any video from the inside to support one way or the other. And if they decided that they weren't going to do that, maybe that's an item for the board to consider when they review that particular situation. But that could be part of maybe Nancy's review as well, just to make sure that I don't know if that would be a relevant factor or not. To me, it would be, but it might not be, might not fit in that spectrum.
Any other comments? Otherwise, we'll move to the next one on the agenda, and that's the penalty structure overhaul. And
I can jump in on this one. I'm just going to pass around what the DOT uses for driving offenses, which is maybe one option that we can look at with trying to revise some of how the penalty structure is operated. You'll see every different offense is given a different number. There's a set timeline where those numbers drift off. Depending if they are over the 12 points or if they are under the 12 points. This is just, something to consider. Right now, as Nancy mentioned, we're kind of bound pretty tightly to what the penalty matrix says we have to do depending on the offense, whether it's a first, second, or third offense for a compliance violation. In addition, if there's an over-serving situation, there's a different list of penalties. So a lot of it kind of depends on what the board is looking at, whether we want to have a point system or revising the current structure of what the fines are. But I thought that would be at least something to look at to give you some ideas to think about when, what makes the most sense for penalties.
That's good, and this has been kind of an ongoing conversation for a long time, Nancy, and so, go ahead.
So just as a little bit of background, each separate violation for each ordinance has a separate penalty on our current ordinance structure. So if you have a violation of serving an underage person, that's one violation, and if within 12 months you have a separate violation, maybe a after-hours consumption or something, that's a separate one violation. So they're not addressed cumulatively. So if you've got, if you've got a whole bunch of different violations, then it comes to, are you operating that facility in a manner that's a potential breach of the peace kind of thing. So the idea of having, and again, this is just a policy question, as is the video, as is the scanners. But the way that you could look at it is that they're cumulative, but some maybe have more points than others. And so each level of penalty, if you've got 3 points, it would be, $500 fine. If you've got 8 points, it's a license sanction, so it's cumulative. That was what some of the discussion points were for the penalty structure. We did present this in my memo, and I recall calling it a heavy lift. I mean, it would take a lot of changes to the ordinances, but our ordinances are very, very old, so there are probably other changes that could absolutely be, modernized to some extent.
So can I ask Nancy, so, and the other thing was, it like resets every 12 months, is that how it goes? I can't remember that, but basically we have if you accumulate a number of violations, but then you have a certain grace period. I can't remember what that was.
Yeah, that is what we have presently, is kind of a reset. If you're without any violations for a period of 12 months, you start at violation 1 again of that type. So that was, something that happened recently with a compliance check, that the second violation was outside of that time. Of course, with the point system, there's probably several different ways you could look at it. Again, policy questions, they're cumulative, but if they go without any violations for an extended period of time, do they reset or deduct, or, how does that work? So again, discussion points.
So it's a similar concept to what you handed out, kind of, that we have a rolling, but the one thing that's a little different, that if it's a very serious thing, you could literally reach your maximum with one offense. Is that a good summary of it?
Yeah, I mean, you could, if it was a bad enough offense, you could assign it enough points where it would be a suspension automatically, just like how on the DOT, 12 points gets you suspended. So if you have a hit and run offense, you're suspended immediately.
So in concept, like the chief and I we've had some experience as well, everyone here, we've had some with multiple violations. Then if they reach a serious point, we've met with them. Some of them have lost their license. So, I mean, we have used this concept, which just maybe isn't quite as methodical as, I don't know if that makes it good, and Steve's been involved too, where we've had some that it's been apparent to all of us, they have some serious issues. So then we meet with them in person, and so if you want to talk about that, Chief.
Sure, and I think in those situations, we used a different part of the ordinance, not necessarily the penalty structure itself. And so that is another means in which we can kind of hold those establishments accountable. But I think the penalty structure, I would at least agree with some form of restructuring, I think, to allow the board and the commission to address problem locations quicker, a little bit easier, rather than waiting for the same violation to occur multiple times again. This may take some time, right? And for that to happen, or may never happen, even though it's occurring. Even just think about compliance checks, that's once in a lifetime. It just doesn't happen very often. So I agree with what you're saying, and that is also an ordinance for us to do. But I think we've got some other pieces here that would help us with some of these other, again, we don't have many problem locations that we're identifying, but when we do, I think the ability to get on top of that quickly is kind of important. And we're a little bit hamstrung in some ways on the way this is laid out.
So it's kind of, I guess at this time, it seems like we don't have as many as we've had in the past, so that's a good thing. When I don't have to meet with you and Steve, that's a good sign. No offense,
Right.
Chief.
No, I think we've made a lot of really good progress. I agree. And so, and shoring up a few other things, we'll be able to, I think, kind of set the bar going forward. And no, I think overall, we're in a very good position.
Yep, that's good. Any other comments or questions about that? But I do think I guess what you're looking for from us is to have it be more of a objective. Does that make sense? You want to have it more of a path that we can follow instead of, no, it's a little bit subjective? I don't know if that's correct.
Well, and I wonder too, do we want to maybe sort of back off some of the monetary penalties, or do we want this to go hand in hand? That'd be one consideration too. Maybe this is where, for the compliance check, it's, 1 point or 2 points, and then there's no monetary for that first failure. And if there's a second, and so that's just a concept or a thought too, that is, or if there's a second failure, well, now there's a monetary plus, another couple points or something like that. If this is something that you would like us to work on, I don't think we need to be directed here, but I'm seeing a lot, some head nodding, and I kind of feel like maybe that's something that we could come back with some more thought out kind of what this penalty would be, how many points and some of that, and then we can present that to you.
Yeah, I really like this idea, and I think, like Nancy said, it's going to take a lot of time because it's going to be deciding how many points for each ordinance, and then what's the violation for those points. So I think it makes sense to get started with it so that we can move it forward with having those substantive discussions of what that'll look like.
I would say that I think it's something that you, as a group, want to present to the city commission for direction back to work with our office and the police and auditor to propose, and then there would be more discussion points about, if we assign a point that the auditor recommends for a point system, that would be something that would then be for discussion, and then, send it up to city commission for final adoption. So again, it's a discussion point, something for you to think about now. What would your recommendation be to the from the Liquor Control Board to the city commission?
Very good. Any other comments? Otherwise, the last one on the list of topics was the scanner requirement. And I don't know if you're going to get us kicked off with that, Steve?
Well, it's something that we've talked about in the past, and I think some of the stumbling points with scanners were, do we require all businesses to have a scanner? You can pick a scanner up relatively cheaply, less than a compliance failure cost. But as we've had demonstrated to us, really all it's going to do, those lower level ones will tell you, yep, that's an ID, right? It'll tell you the information that's on that ID. And you had to get up to the forensic scanners that really, could tell you whether or not it met all of the qualifications. And so, we have some businesses that sell, $2,000 of alcohol a year. And if you're making them buy a $5,500 scanner, that might be kind of out of whack. Or do we try to go down the path of identifying that if it's, more of a bar, that those are the ones that have to have it. But the problem there is with our liquor licenses the way they are, some of our licenses are bars that sell food too. And so, those are some of the stumbling points that we fell into kind of last time, and then identifying, what's that level of scanner? Do we require every licensee? So I don't know, just bring that back. Those are the kind of the areas where we started running into issues trying to figure out whether or not we had something we could move forward.
So to me, I will not ever favor requiring people to have a scanner. I think the one that we had an example of, that thing was very impressive and works great, but to me, it's complementary. The most important thing is checking IDs. You need to have good staff that are checking IDs. That's the first thing. The scanners, that is a complementary thing. I think if we required scanners, then people would just say, well, I have that, so then I'm wash my hands, and that's not what it should be. So that's just my 2 cents. I do wish, if I had a bar, I'd have a scanner, just because I think it's an insurance, and I think we need to do more to encourage everybody to have those, because we've all seen it. You can't, with the human eye, tell the difference. The fakes are so good. So that's just my 2 cents. I think we have some in inventory, and I think we need to do more to encourage people to use them, because I do think they help. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
No, I agree too. I don't recommend or would require scanners. I do think the forensic scanners actually kind of go hand in hand with the cameras, because it can register that person and that time frame, and it kind of do that more accurate of who was in that establishment during a certain period of time. But I've seen so many different places, like I travel to South Dakota, and you can buy beer in every gas station, and a lot of places, their point of sale will require to scan an ID. Well, most times not, the cashier will not even look at the ID. They just look at the back, scan it, and whatever. So it doesn't matter. So a lot of times scanners can be used just to scan it, and if it reads, great. So they're not really looking at the ID. So I would hate to have a person just rely solely on the scanner. I think the forensic scanners, I don't know why you wouldn't want to have it, except for if you have so many different areas. Like I was at an event this weekend that had 4 different entries, so you'd have to have 4 different scanners for that event. So I see where that could be a little bit more difficult, but I think the forensic scanners are awesome, and especially if we have 15 of them that are available. I think that's awesome that they have that option to use it, but requiring scanners, I think, would be logistically and unethical.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I want to just add a little, human element here, but I was at a local establishment here, and I was going to watch the Bison game, and group right before the game came in, younger group, and the bartender pulled out his phone. Sure looked like he was scanning the IDs to me, right? So later on, when he wasn't so busy, I asked him, well, what kind of app do you have on that? Oh, no, it's no app at all, but I can't see. So I have a flashlight. I said, well, the kids thought you were scanning it, so that really did its job, Anyway, okay, that's just my aside for today.
Well, I will add one comment. I will say, for having a daughter that is in NDSU, the arrest that was made for the person counterfeiting the IDs sent a lot of pressure to the area of people saying, hey, they are watching. Police, I commend the police for that. That was a great deterrent on the fake IDs. It was from the grapevine that I heard.
Very good. Any other comments? So now we have open comments. So if anybody has, but I guess I have a couple of questions. So the de-escalation training, we went to that. It was a good thing. What is the path going forward, including that?
But so I don't know if we, want to make it an annual thing, or if we want to make it mandatory. Again, I don't agree with the mandatory part of it. I can certainly line up another course. We have training here within the city of Fargo, and I see that our trainer must have attended one of those 2, or at least part of it, and he lined up de-escalation training for city staff, which he's going to modify for the city staff, but I'm certain we can get the same guy back, or they may have another person that presents it too, if that's something that you want to work on. Problem is that it does cost the city a certain amount of money. With tight budgets, the way that goes, I think we came out pretty close to being even with the 2 sessions that we had before. One was completely full and one was about 3/4 full. So if you want, I can work on that again and try to get that lined up.
from my perspective, I thought it was great, and I'm glad the city staff, because I think it benefits the city staff too. But I think it's not just bars, it's also restaurants, and I went through it, and it was eye-opening, and I learned a lot. And so I think that however you can do it as far as scheduling it, but if there's some way we can at least offer it every so often, I think it was beneficial in a lot of different ways. So that's just me, and the whole budget thing, I totally get that, but maybe you can look into that to see if there's some way we can make it a little more reasonable.
Sure. So Chief, you had an officer attend. Did you get any feedback from him? I think it was Yestable maybe that was at it, or?
Other than they thought it was a good training.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, they thought it was a good training, and it was, I think it's a good process to do, absolutely.
I'll work on something then.
Okay, that's great. So that was the question I had. The other one I had for you was, so now we're doing a review of the background checks. I don't know if you've started that process yet. Maybe you can update us on how that's going.
Yeah, I'll probably tag off to the chief here, but we sent out the first quarter of the new renewal and tried to pick a group of people that would, well, first of all, we had most of the people had multiple licenses so that we didn't have to explain what we were doing as often. And then tried to pick a group of people that would be able to understand what the concept was. You know, we've got some of our licensees it'll, you know, if you make a change like that, it's going to be a little more difficult. So our intention is to get most of our corporate types, so the Red Lobsters, the Applebee's, some of those, so they'll renew at year end because that's when their state license renews. So for them, maybe it'll make more sense that they're renewing all their liquor licenses at the same time. We've gone through, I think we've got most of our background checks back now that we've submitted. And I think it's going pretty well. I mean, so.
And I guess my main concern was that it wasn't taking up more of the staff time than you could handle, just because it's something that we haven't done before.
Yeah, sure. And our staff, we were concerned that PD would get overwhelmed, but they've turned the background checks around really fast. And so I think it's gone really well. Actually, as we've worked through it, our staff was kind of excited to be doing this because rather than doing 200 at once, now we're doing 50 at a time, and it's just a lot more manageable.
That's good.
Yep.
Yes, go ahead.
Just on that issue, I would concur that it's going very efficiently, and I think that's been good. But there have been some concerns that have come up and by and large, these have breezed through, but there have been, as suspected, some areas of concern that I think in talking with the city attorney, we see the need to probably do some amendments to the qualification guidelines to maybe consider these particular things going forward, because the guidelines, remember, were set up in which, as an owner, I did this one time and I will never do it again, and now with the new managers annually. So we've had some brief discussions about that, and we'll probably have some suggested edits to that going forward. You know, I'll toss it to Nancy for any other additional input.
Some of these ordinances have been there for a long time, Nancy, so it just might be that we need to update some of those. So maybe you can just update us on that as time goes by.
I don't have much to add to it's a resolution question for the guidelines that were adopted in 2018. And of course, there are differences of opinion as to what should and shouldn't be considered when a liquor license is issued. So that is something that the chief is working on, and they will present to you for consideration. But it would be something that would be adopted by the city commission on those guidelines. So yeah, I'm just working with them on that as how to present that.
Okay. Very good. This is your chance this is open mic night. And so if you have any other comments or questions, now's the time. I want to thank everybody for being on this committee. We have lots of good members, and all the staff really, I think we all work well together. So I appreciate doing this. I think I would say now it seems like we aren't having as many issues. Like I said, Steve and the chief or Nancy, we all have to meet together to put out a fire. So that's a good thing. I don't know if that's a good description, Steve, but why don't you give us since you're the sage of the group, Steve, why don't you give us a closing overview of how you think things are going?
Well, I really like the makeup of this group now. Not that it wasn't good before, but I really feel like we've got a good combination, a good mix, solid group. And, you know, the liquor licenses we have they've been around for a long time, right? The ordinances that we work from. And so, yeah, I think that as the city has grown, there have been things that have emerged that are more of a concern that, you know, cause us to tweak the license or the ordinance structure a little bit. And so that's just part of, you know, the growing pains that we have being a big city. And you know, I think that we're cognizant of the changes and the effects that they have on the industry. And we want to move slowly with some of that kind of stuff. So, you know, that's probably enough to say.
That's good.
I have one question
ahead.
about where we're going to be walking away from this meeting. So it's this things, and we talked about that compliance check failure and John's motion that he had made, that we need to put it on our agenda for our next meeting to have an amended motion and make sure that's taken care of, and things like the penalty structure actually direct you guys to do that. Okay.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. You'd want to do it at a formal meeting, but this really was an opportunity to kind of say what you might consider at the next meeting. So Steve will have that on the agenda for further considerations.
Perfect. I think that'll be great. So glad we're moving forward with that.
Very good. Anything else to add? Otherwise, thank everybody for coming, and we will adjourn. Have a good afternoon.